But this afternoon, we're very privileged to have with us Professor Guven Sak, who is with TEPAV, which is the Turkey Economic and Political, I think, Association, is it? I'm not sure what the A stands for. We look forward to hearing your presentation, Professor, and the floor is yours.
Let me start with TEPAV. TEPAV is the Economic Policy Research Foundation of Turkey. We were established as a foundation, but we consider ourselves as a think and do tank, let me say, a think tank which is doing things also by focusing on concrete projects in different countries. And we were working closely with the Turkish Chamber Federation. That's how we are also focusing on policy advocacy issues. So it's a privilege for me to speak in this policy advocacy working group meeting too. We have discussed a little bit about the issues in the agenda. And I think the objective here is, we are now living in an interesting period. People are talking about whether this is an interwar period between Cold War I and Cold War II. We are not yet sure about that, but this is definitely a kind of age of disruption. The world that we know of is changing. People are discussing about de-risking and decoupling when it comes to the existing global value chains. There are risks for sure, but there are also opportunities. And I think the important issue for all of us, for the business communities in different countries, in the CACCI countries, also to focus more on the opportunities that this disruption may bring in. There are changes, regarding the climate change agenda that are becoming more and more visible. And also what we need to do in this age of disruption is to look for the opportunities and try to find ways about closer cooperation between different countries, between different business communities. And I think that's a good role for the chambers of commerce and industry in the countries, I think. So the objective is to provide a kind of, a blueprint, let's say, about how to think about the opportunities for closer cooperation in this new environment. So with that, this is the framework that I have in mind when it comes to today's presentation. As I noted, this is an age of global disruption. And there are regional impacts that needs to be considered with respect to our agenda in terms of the global value chains. Then I'll say a few words about, as there are so many and diverse CACCI countries, it might be useful to have some regional CACCI workshops on the possible impact along the way. But let me start with the age of global disruption. I think the world has changed, especially rapidly after 2015, because I remember 2015, that was the year that Turkey was leading G20 countries, and also that was the year, at the year end, the Paris Agreement was signed on climate change, and a new framework has emerged, and the climate agenda has started to move forward. It started to move forward more rapidly, let me say, when European Commission President von der Leyen announced that Green Deal is the new growth strategy for Europe. In December 2019, it started to move forward more rapidly. We had seen since then other transnational threats like the pandemic, and we have extremism in many of the countries that we need to deal with. But then we have this great power competition that has arisen, that has become more visible, especially between US and China, and it is all related with this race for new technologies, especially in AI, chip making. There is, and also the biotechnology. We have a new race for new technologies, and I think all these discussions about great power competition, all these discussions about de-risking and decoupling is very much related with this race for new technologies. It's obvious that this race for new technologies and this great power competition is going to have a regional impact, a global impact on value chains. There is the possibility, the probable possibility for the realignment of global value chains. That's why what that discussion about decoupling or de-risking China has arisen, has started to become important. And now we have countries with transformative agendas already, especially the hydrocarbon producers, are trying to realign their own countries by focusing on new growth strategies, as most of the countries are about to lose their business plans, their mode of doing business as a result of this age of global change, especially with this, when this climate agenda becomes more pervasive. The hydrocarbon producers need to focus on new things, but it's obvious that the possible realignment in the global value chains, the climate change discussions are also requires a change in all countries, transformation in the economies of all countries by taking into account how their growth strategies are impacting the earth also. You know, we now have a new partner that we need to take into account, and that requires a change not only in one country, not only in the EU itself. The EU is now focusing on carbon border adjustment mechanism to import climate change issues or climate change measures to other countries, but it is also getting more and more pervasive in all around the world. So we need to think about what to do in this era of change when it comes to changes in the global value chains. Now let me go very quickly. You know, since from 1965 to today, major production centers all around the world has changed. The production centers has moved to the east from 1965 to 2019, but still the EU, or let me say G7, is still the largest market in the world. That doesn't rule out the fact that there are going to be growing new centers with younger populations like in Africa, but currently the major market is in the EU, USA, Canada, in the G7 countries, basically. So we need to take into account the changes in those countries in determining the product standards, and that's what's happening in the EU now. They are changing the product standards that they require by taking into account the impact of the old mode of production on climate. So they are taking that into account, and up until now we have this great power competition too. This in 2 digits shows horizontal axis. That's the share in total imports. We use total imports of China. Share in total imports of different products, and the vertical axis shows the China's share in EU's imports. We can see that there are electrical machinery, equipment, and industrial machinery that are important in the current global value chains as China is supplying to the EU. This is also true. China is an important country when we look at 4 digits classification of the products. We can now see the products, and still China has an important share in the EU's composition. And this is how the China's export composition is changing since the BRI project has started. This is interesting, I think, because as I have noted, with the change in population growth, there is a dynamic element that the markets are going to change. So it's good to take that into account, but it is also important that with problems with this great power competition, the share of China in selling goods to EU, US, and other G7 countries is declining, while the share of BRI countries are increasing. So in laying the foundations for a new infrastructure, China is increasing its inroads to other markets, but that is also leading to a substantial decline in the share of China's total exports to the G7 countries at the same time. So this is how intra-regional trade is organized in different occasions or in different organizational structures. You know, we have in the on the left-hand side, the first one is EU. Light blue is 2011 and dark blue is 2021. There is an increase in inter-regional trade in the EU, and ASEAN is the third one, while CACCI countries are the second one. ASEAN is the third one, and you know, I'd like to talk about this in terms of how different forms of integration leads to different levels of trade integration, basically. So in the case of the EU, it's basically rule-based, but ASEAN is mostly related with, depends on interaction. But the CACCI countries also is the second in the world in terms of intra-regional trade. And if we add 3 countries to ASEAN, that is Japan, Korea, to ASEAN, then ASEAN's share, intra-regional trade share, has increased substantially as a result of that. So that is the reason why we are thinking that it might be useful to think about regional workshops and regional manufacturing hubs, to think about different regional manufacturing hubs in order to supply products to the EU market, to the G7 market, when the objective is to decouple or de-risk the Chinese global value chains. And there, these roads are going to be important, but let me pass them very quickly. When we look at the GVC participation in different parts of the world, in the case of CACCI, it is declining, especially it is forward participation is declining. There are 2 types of linkages to global value chains. One is backward participation or backward linkage. That's about demanding products from other countries in order to produce things. And forward linkage is supplying products to the production process of other countries. The decline especially is in the forward participation when it comes to the CACCI region. So that's the area where China has a higher role, and where, let me come here, where China, in terms of value added in China is in the middle. 32% of its value added is forward participation in the value chains. So if the objective is to replace China or take the place of China in one way or another, then the CACCI countries need to think more about what to do. And when we look at the CACCI countries, in different parts of the CACCI countries, the red one is the high technology part. As you can see, there are differences. East Asia, Southeast Asia are different from, very different from Central Asia, and Australasia are very much different in terms of the technology breakdown of their exports. But it is possible to identify some major economies in different regions. So on the left-hand side, you can see the diversification of different countries in terms of the number of products with RCA greater than 1, with competitiveness. And on the right-hand side, you can see the net green potential of the different countries. And those major countries, for example, if you look at Central Asia, if you add Turkey there, Turkey is a major economy. But in East Asia, there is Japan. In South Asia, there is India. In the Southeast Asia, there is Vietnam and Indonesia that can be considered. Vietnam is more diversified in terms of being a manufacturing hub. In Australasia, there is New Zealand to consider. And it is possible also to identify that those major economies also have a higher green potential, which is important in this new age of transformation, which needs to be taken into account. And when we look at the market share of CACCI along the years, especially after 2016, it looks that, the market share of CACCI countries has declined due to a decrease in competitiveness, while China has increased its market share by adapting to changes in the demand, and it might be related with the fact that, this Chinese inroads to the new markets, to the BRI countries, might have an impact there in terms of the adaptation capacity of China. But in terms of adaptation capacity, like China, which is for me, it's on the left-hand side, Taiwan, Singapore, Korea, the major economies also has that adaptation capacity too that needs to be taken into account in terms of discussing establishing new value chains. So when we look at the countries, it looks that Netherlands, Germany, Ireland, and Belgium might be prominent markets to increase forward participation in replacing China. We have discussed this issue before. I have noted that forward participation, it looks to be the Achilles heel of the CACCI countries that needs to be improved in order to increase GVC participation of the CACCI countries. And it is possible to identify that these are the markets that needs to be taken into account. So in this graph, horizontal axis shows the China's share in the foreign value added used in the country's exports, and those are the countries. The color of the dot denotes the sectors that are important for the global value chains. For Germany and France, the red one is electronics, and the light blue is electrical equipment. It's in Germany, Ireland, and also I see also Spain there is one of the dots right on the 45% line. And there is also the machinery that needs to be taken into account. These sectors, these areas, looks to be the areas that needs to be considered in these different countries when it comes to their close cooperation or their reliance on China in terms of forward participation. So the horizontal axis is the China's share in the country's exports, and the vertical axis is the CACCI's share in the country's exports. So this one shows the areas where China is now prominent at the moment, but CACCI countries also has an advantage that needs to be taken into account. So from now on, the important issue is about discussing how to do this thing, how to diversify China in EU's exports. So it is both based on new transportation routes, and also it's also about establishing value chains across Asia. The importance for the role for CACCI, I think, there is to facilitate coordination and establish maybe regional working groups with the participation of the decision makers in different countries. As this is policy working group, it's about putting forward a policy framework for the policy makers about how to act in order to improve both intra-trade potential within the CACCI countries and also improve inroads to the largest market in the world for the CACCI countries, and it looks to be doable. Let me conclude here a note on how to move forward. So it's about how to manage the impact of the Green Deal on the CACCI countries. It is definitely going to change, especially with the addition of great power competition now. The current global value chains, there is going to be a period for realignment. And I think this ASEAN +3 example that I have noted shows that countries from CACCI, Korea, Japan, and China are added to the ASEAN, and intra-trade in terms of inter-regional trade, ASEAN becomes more prominent than the EU. So I think this is an opportunity that needs to be used from now on too. And the objective is now to find a mechanism to replace China, if you ask me. And that can be done with integration of different CACCI regions, major economies. I have noted there Turkey, India, Japan, Indonesia, and Vietnam. In order to discuss more about the product space of the impact on the chosen regional integration pattern, that's what we have been working on now. But I don't want to impose this on you. So we are waiting for your comments on how to move forward from now. For example, because it changes. It changes on which country you are putting on which region. The product pattern, the product space impact changes according to that. If you put Turkey into Central Asia and look for the products that are becoming more prominent in replacing China, it is different from putting Vietnam, not only in South Asia, putting Vietnam to Central Asia changes the product space impact too. So it might be useful to have a discussion on how to integrate major economy to different CACCI regions and look for the opportunities, the possible impact on the product space, I think.
Thank you, Professor. What a fascinating presentation, and it's indeed a very rich study. There's so many elements to it. We could probably spend the rest of the day on several of them. From your perspective, the workshops that CACCI might conduct regionally, I mean, how would you suggest we go about that?
Told you that, it might be useful for CACCI members to lead us, to lead the analysis from this moment on, because adding different major economies in different regions of CACCI, as I have noted, there are different regional characteristics, leads to different products, leads to different changes in the product space, and leads to answers different questions in the EU market in terms of replacing China. So it might be good to specify those regions together. But when it comes to the regions as a whole, I think it is all there. Southwest Asia is one, Central Asia is another. We can also bring them together to those regions. South Asia or Southeast Asia, or both of them are, important in order to take into account. So it is possible to identify at least 3, at most 5 regions, but how to conduct the analysis, how to complete the analysis from now on, because, I'm doing this analysis from Turkey. I'd like to add Turkey into all the discussions, and that changes, that's so helpful for Turkey, and also what that leads to one product space, a new product, only one new product space impact. But it is possible that you may have different regions, so you can tell me that in order to see the impact of this country to be in collaboration with this group, what does the impact regarding that kind of a coordination or direction for us, I think, is useful at this stage.
But Lennon Tan from Singapore is an earlier contributor, and here he is, just straight from Singapore. He's the president of the Singapore Manufacturers Federation, and he's going to make a comment.
Professor, thank you for your presentation. It was very refreshing. I guess we talk about the geopolitical situation, trade wars, and that has led to situation leading to supply chain having to do nearshoring. Nearshoring means you may have to produce near or at the place where you do business with. So if you supply to the EU, the kind of expectation now is that you need to be produced in the EU, and similarly for North America and so on. So we have our members who have done that. So in the past, but their main area of production is in China to supply to the rest of the world. So because of the recent situation, they have moved some of the supply chain to Vietnam. So the situation is that because of the difference of efficiency, you'll find that, for example, if a a product or a parts is expected to be produced. Once we place an order, you get the parts in 3 weeks. But when this is the actual situation, when you move to Vietnam, 3 weeks, the raw material has just arrived from China to Vietnam, and then they haven't started producing. So then the expectation of the previous expectation is what happened. So now from 3 weeks, it have to be 6 weeks or maybe 9 weeks. So this has caused, the kind of consideration, right? That look, it's painful either way. Yeah, it's painful not to supply from an area outside of the geopolitical situation, but it's painful because the supply chain has all been disrupted, and the kind of efficiency that was expected that China has brought, or other parts of area of efficiency production is no longer available if you move somewhere else. Another example was you move part of the operation to Mexico, same thing happened. So what do you think? Do you think that the situation will force, or the geopolitical situation will force the kind of scenario anyway? You just have to live with the inefficiency, or things will have some reversal after a while? Professor, please. Thank you.
In terms of the geopolitical situation that we have, and it's not only the geopolitical situation as far as I see. That's why we have this decoupling and de-risking discussion. De-risking is about, changing the global value chains in certain areas only, like AI-related or quantum computing-related areas that are going to be more and more important in defense industries in the coming period. So de-risking is related, and also chip production is one of those items too. But decoupling is about cutting all the trade ties. Cutting all the trade ties in a very short period of time does not look to be a possibility. But also we have to take into account or consider the impact that why we have these discussions is not only related with technological change and geopolitical situation, but it is also related with the governance structure. I think how the pandemic was managed by China led to a disruption for everybody. So I think it has shown that in the case of dealing with transnational threats, there is the need for a common agenda, a common framework, common governance framework also about how to deal with these issues. If China didn't have those lockdowns, we didn't have those concrete lockdowns, I think we may not be here at this moment. And I think there is the need for more discussion on this second issue too, about how to, so this is something new. The pandemic was something new for all of us. We didn't know how to manage that. And different reactions to the same problem, I think, led to new search for solutions, because it led to a disruption for many companies. I think that's one of the issues that are important. I agree that, when you try to formulate a new global value chain, it is not that easy. It takes time. And also, that the timing of supplying the commodities at the right time is also an important issue. But I think that requires and not only reaching an agreement on the geopolitical issue, which is already there, and that's why the de-risking is going to be important. But I think there is the need for an agreement about how we are going to deal with these transnational threats together globally. We don't know about that yet. I think that's the issue that we have at hand at the moment. And Singapore is still doing very well, I mean, as far as I see, in the global value chains.
Now, there was someone else had their hand up I saw before.
Thank you, Professor. That's I think that's your speech was very enlightening to me. And just to follow that, the chairman of SMF, Mr. Tan's comment, that's I would like to share one of that. Perhaps that's my opinion, because nowadays people talking about the destruction of the global supply chain, especially after the 2018, since the US-China trade war. So that's we understand, and also that we have already seen that many companies already invested in China have gradually reallocation or reorganization of their supply chain by moving their manufacturing assembly line out of China to many other countries, such as ASEAN countries, and also Mexico for the North American market, even like Taiwanese company, that some of them even moved to Poland for EU market. But however, that we found that this reorganization of the supply chain, that means to many the Taiwanese investors, we say the purpose is to expanding or the global supply chain. Expanding not necessarily mean the loss of China supply chain. We also so-called the China plus one, this strategy. So we still have our supply chain in China for China, but the third country, the so-called the China plus one, to serve the rest of China. And so that's recently that's we're already seeing, although many the foreign investors, they move their production line out of China, but they haven't leave China. So that's we see the China's position in the global supply chain still play a very dominant role. So that's perhaps that's my observation. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I was last in China in 2016 or 2017. You know, so when we look at about the changes, the disruption in the global value chains, it's not a total destruction, of course. But we need to identify a few trends, I think. The first one, I agree, it's not about losing China totally. That doesn't require that at the end of the day. But first, there was, you know, this is the period where structural change in China has been ending. It's kind of, you know, no more people are coming from the rural areas to the urban areas. So in the past, in China too, it's about, you know, the lower wages that are providing an opportunity for the investments in China, that were providing an opportunity, but that's now changing. And that's is in the same period, outward direct investments of China were increasing too at the same time. So there is one structural change in China that needs to be taken into account in the realignment of the global value chains. And also, as a second element within the framework of that, as under the term US-China trade war, there is that de-risking element in certain areas that looks to become more and more important in the near future. Thirdly, there is the issue of green transformation. Green transformation is here to stay, and it's going to stay with us, and that requires a change in how things are supplied. You know, because up until now, when we talk about supply chains, when we talk about growth process in our countries, we only look at the growth figures in our countries, how the people living in our countries are influenced by this trade relation kind of a you know, mentality that we have. But now we are going to be in a new period where the impact of that trade or that manufacturing activity in a certain part of the world on the climate, on the earth, is also going to be important. This is a new period. We are going to now see new measurements, new parameters to consider in estimating the success. So this green transformation itself requires a change in global value chains. Chinese are doing their utmost in order to cope with these requirements as far as I see. But this is also an important issue that needs to be taken into account. And of course, when it comes to, at the end of the day, you know, when it comes to global value chains, cost is going to be the most important determinant at the end of the day. I mean, if the country, that's why in the case of the policy advocacy, that's the issue, you know. In order to replace China, you have to do something better, either in green transformation or in the case of the wages, in the case of the logistics network, you have to do something better. You have to lower some costs. And that's the sole objective of. It's not only about the capacity to produce things. It's not only about having a diversified manufacturing hub in your country. That's not enough. But in order to replace something in the global value chains, you have to do something better than the incumbent in that network. So I think that's where the policy advocacy working group needs to focus on, as far as I see. And I think that's what we need to put together in these, Peter mentioned about the regional workshops. If we have those regional workshops and if we agree on those regional workshops with the participants on which areas to focus, what are the, you know, the positive contribution of this region in replacing a portion of the existing global value chain, I think we can do something better. So I agree. It's not about, you know, totally. I don't think a total decoupling China is a possibility. I mean, China is no Soviet Union. There is no question regarding that issue. China is an integral part of the world economy, and in order to replace that, you have to do something better than China.